Okay, hi. I'm sat here with Professor John Hughes, who's Professor of 19th Century Literature. But you've written a book that's not about that, John.
Yeah, I mean, I've written a book on Bob Dylan, which came out a year or so ago, which is basically an investigation of his career during the 1960s, and it charts the different kind of albums that he produced and the various sort of changes that he went through in terms of different styles, but also tries to link the music with the context of the time and the shifting cultural landscape of the 1960s.
And that gives me a bit of a clue, perhaps, but why would somebody who's interested primarily in 19th century English literature be interested in Bob Dylan, other than the fact that they want to listen to him?
I suppose on a personal level, it's connected, I suppose, to my past in that when I was a teenager, I suppose, I became very interested in Dylan, and I kind of like kids do, and I got really sort of wrapped up and absorbed in him, and I kind of lived for buying a new album and thinking about a new record and all of that. And I think it was partly because of the words, really, and the way that he uses words. I was really intrigued by the fact that I couldn't understand really what the words were saying, and yet they had a powerful effect on me, and they were obviously really inspiring and poetic, and I think that's kind of part of what he always brings. I think that what interests me now is in a way, the connection between that and what we think of as literature, in that Dylan is obviously a very poetic writer, and yet most people would not want to call him a poet. And there's a lot of resistance to acknowledging him or criticising him in terms of literary criticism. And yet it's also true that I know a lot of poets and a lot of literary critics, and a lot of them are very, very, Dylan is very embedded in their psyches and in their experience. And so if he's not a poet, then so much the worse for poets.
Yes,
you want to say.
Poetry's lost.
Yeah,
and I think that thing you said about having a feeling that you don't quite get the words, or can't kind of extract an obvious meaning from them, but are really at the same time kind of feel slightly moved by them.
Yeah.
It's something I think a lot of people felt about Dylan, and really kind of lured them into wanting to kind of think about him and criticise him more.
Yeah.
And the book's called Invisible Now.
Yeah.
Why is it called that?
I suppose the title, in a way, goes back to what you were saying, because in a way what I'm interested in is capturing in the book, I suppose, to paraphrase Dylan himself, in the same song that Invisible Now is in, the phrase Invisible Now is in, the question is sort of, how does it feel, really? What I'm interested in is exactly that kind of sense of inspiration, and the way that is passed on to the listener, the way that it makes you feel something and it's inspiring, and yet you don't really know quite how and why it's working and why it's doing the things to you that it is doing. In terms of the title, I'd link that in with what I've just been saying, in that the title Invisible Now comes from the song Like a Rolling Stone, which was a song that was crucial in his career, in that it came to a point at which he was actually talking about giving up songwriting. And yet it kick-started his career again, and kick-started so many changes in American music and in rock music generally, and arguably in other sort of cultural forms, from the 1960s, from that moment onwards. And I think that I chose the words Invisible Now from that song because I think what's intrinsic to Dylan's kind of inspiration is the idea that it places you somewhere where you don't really understand what's happening. It puts you at a position between, if you like, your past and, where you're facing a future that's full of possibility, but it's also unknown. And so it involves a kind of sense of self-transformation, but also leaving a previous version of yourself behind. And it's that kind of sense of transition that I feel is intrinsic to his work, and to that inspiring kind of effect, and also to his use of words, that it's placing you as a reader somewhere where you're excited, and there's all this sense of possibility, but you're not nailing it down.
I think anyone who's been a Dylan fan or listened to a fair bit of Dylan can't fail to have noticed the way that he does things with words that aren't like the songwriters. I think so. I think that's really interesting. That gives us a little bit of a clue as to why we find it so compelling.
Yeah.
And we're going to feel drawn in like that.
Yeah. And I think that, in a way, that also corresponds to the way that if you look at how he writes, the idea of surprise is a sort of integral part of his sort of, you know, his armoury or his repertoire. That he often will set up a line and then the next one will go in some completely different direction, or will undercut it or surprise it or add something to it that you hadn't expected. And so there's that sense of transition, of kind of interruption, of surprise, of, you know, possibility of shifting the ground is kind of there right from, you know, within his language as well.
As soon as you say those things, it sounds like literary methods. Make him sound like a poet. He sounds like he's deploying all those literary tools in a very kind of specific kind of way.
It is really poetic. But I think that in an odd sort of way, Dylan is as creative as he is, and particularly as he was in the 1960s. He could be as creative as he was because he wasn't an orthodox poet. And so rock music, if you like, he was there at the time at which, as a genre, it was expanding and changing, and, you know, went through, you know, so many changes itself, and he was able to, you know, as it were, a bit like kind of Picasso or something. You
so
know,
almost inventing genres as you go along.
Exactly, inventing as you go along. And there was the scope to do that, whereas in poetry there wouldn't have been that scope for creativity that I think is there in his work, you know.
Well, I think hopefully you've persuaded people actually that serious students of literature will be doing themselves a disservice if they don't at least pay a little bit of attention to Bob Dylan.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, you asked me at the very beginning, why did I want to do it? And I think it's also because of the pleasure of it, really. And that, you know, I remember as a teenager, you know, in school, finding it, that sense of possibility that it transmitted to me, and the pleasure that it transmitted, so kind of powerful. That, and in the book I wanted to try and capture that and to say something about it, and to formulate it, and to struggle with it, and to try and grapple with ways of describing it. And it has many different kind of aspects, I think, but that's probably...
But yeah, looking at literature, and in this case, Dylan's work, in terms of pleasure, is probably all too often overlooked, but actually really important.
It is really important, and that's another feature, I think, that, as I say, if my book is about inspiration or creativity, or hopefully about those sorts of things, and about the way that's passed on to the listener, I think it's worth saying that there are many books on Dylan, but they don't really do that sort of thing. That's why I wanted to write one, because most books will be talking about you know, the 1960s, or they'll be talking about the music and its influences, or they'll be talking maybe in literary critical terms, analysing the lyrics as if they're poems. But I think what I wanted to do more than anything was to try and find some idiom, some way of writing that would capture, you know, my sense of what his writing communicates to the reader.
Thank you.
Cheers, thanks, Dave.